My name is Robert Miller. I'm 62 years old, and my story begins the morning I came home from surgery. My body was weak, stitched and sore, but my heart carried hope that my family would welcome me back with kindness. Instead, as I sat down, my only son leaned across the table, smirked, and said, "Thanks to your farm, Dad, my wife will see the Bahamas." In that single moment, I realized betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. It comes from the people you trust the most. Backhand index pointing right before I share what happened next. Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. I remember the smell of antiseptic still clinging to me when I stepped through the door of my old farmhouse. The surgery had taken more out of me than I had expected. Every step felt heavy. Every breath a reminder that I wasn't the man I used to be. Yet, in my mind, I pictured a warm welcome. Maybe my son would help me to the couch. Maybe my daughter-in-law would set out a meal. Something comforting. After all, I had nearly given my life to that farm, and in my mind, we were still a family that valued each other. But the house didn't feel warm. It felt quiet, tense, like something had shifted in my absence. "Dad, you're back," my son Mark said, stepping out of the kitchen. He was 34, tall like me but softer around the edges. He wasn't wearing the work clothes I expected. No boots caked in dirt, no sweat on his brow. Instead, he wore a pressed shirt, casual but polished. That alone sent a strange shiver through me. I lowered myself into the chair at the dining table, my legs trembling with weakness. Mark's wife, Claire, hovered nearby, her hands folded tight against her stomach, as if she wasn't sure whether to welcome me or stay silent. She gave a half-smile that never reached her eyes. "Dad," Mark said again, pulling up a chair. His tone was almost cheerful, almost rehearsed. "You'll never guess what I did while you were away." I waited, thinking maybe he had fixed the old barn roof, or finally repaired the fence the cattle kept pushing through. Something useful. Something that showed he cared about the land that had raised him. Instead, he leaned forward, that smirk spreading across his face. "I sold the farm, and with the money, Claire and I are heading to the Bahamas for our honeymoon." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. My ears still rang from the constant beeping and humming of hospital machines, but his words cut through clear as a bell. "Sold the farm." Just like that. Claire's head dropped, her eyes fixed on the table. She didn't speak, didn't defend him, didn't protest. Her silence told me everything. She knew, and she agreed. I felt the world tilt. That farm wasn't just dirt and fences. It was 50 years of sweat, blood, and sacrifice. It was the place where I buried my wife, the soil where I taught Mark how to plant corn, the home where I thought memories meant more than money. You sold it." My voice cracked. "Relax, Dad," Mark said, almost laughing. "We got a great deal. Don't worry, you'll still have a place here. But honestly, you should thank me. Thanks to your farm, my wife will see the Bahamas." He said it like a punchline, like I was supposed to laugh with him. His arrogance hit me harder than the surgery scars ever could. I smiled faintly, but it wasn't out of humor. It was the kind of smile you wear when your insides are tearing apart, but you refuse to show weakness. Inside, though, my chest burned. I remember the nights I stayed up, patching tractor tires in the cold. The mornings I woke before dawn, driving into town with aching hands to buy feed. I remembered his small hands holding mine as I showed him how to plant his first row of beans. And now, those same hands had signed away everything. Claire cleared her throat softly. "Mark, maybe." But Mark cut her off, waving her words away like they were nothing. "Come on, Dad, don't look at me like that. We deserve this. We've been stuck here too long. Don't you think Claire deserves something nice after the wedding?" The word deserve rang in my ears. What about what I deserved? What about the years I deserved to live on the land I built from nothing? I looked around the room, noticing details I'd never paid attention to before. A suitcase near the door, half-zipped with new clothes spilling out. Airline tickets on the counter, their corners curling in the afternoon light. Everything was already decided. My opinion didn't matter. The betrayal didn't hit all at once. It came in waves. First shock, then disbelief, then an ache so deep I thought it might finish what the surgery had started. Still, I kept smiling, nodding faintly, even as my heart splintered. I had learned long ago that anger makes men careless. Silence, on the other hand, makes men dangerous. Mark leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, satisfied with himself. "Don't worry, Dad. We'll send you postcards." The room went quiet. I could hear the clock ticking, slow and steady, each second reminding me that I was sitting across from a stranger who happened to share my blood. I wanted to shout, to slam my fist on the table, to demand he undo what he had done. But instead, I studied his face, the same boy I had carried on my shoulders during county fairs, the boy I had cheered for at baseball games, the boy I thought would carry on my legacy. That boy was gone. All that remained was a man with a smirk and a ticket to the Bahamas. I folded my hands, covering the tremor in them. "Well," I said quietly, "isn't that something?" And that was it. No fight, no explosion. Just a calm voice that hid the storm brewing inside me. Because in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something else entirely. Something Mark could never see coming. I sat there, still staring at my son's smirk, when the memories began to bleed in. My body was in the present, but my mind wandered back to the years when this land wasn't just soil, but my entire reason for waking up every morning. His laughter echoed faintly in the room, but what I heard more clearly was the crack of frozen earth under my boots in the winter of '84. I was 20 years younger then, my back still strong, my hands blistered but steady. The snow had piled up against the old barn doors, and I'd fought to push them open just to get to the cattle. The wind was so sharp it stung my eyes, yet I trudged forward because they depended on me. Each step was a battle, but the thought of keeping them fed gave me strength. I never complained, not once. That farm wasn't just about survival. It was about pride, about proving that a man's worth is measured by the sweat he leaves in the soil. I remembered the mornings when I rose before the sun, slipping quietly out of bed, so I wouldn't wake my wife, Linda. She'd always whisper a sleepy, "Be careful," before rolling over, her hair spilling across the pillow like sunlight itself. I'd make my way out, coffee in hand, steam curling against the dawn chill. There's a sound only farmers know, the hum of silence before the roosters crow, before the first tractor starts, before the world fully wakes. That silence was sacred to me. And then there were the harvest seasons, long, brutal stretches of time, when days blurred into nights. Mark was just a boy then, maybe 10, running through the rows, his arms out like wings. He'd laugh when I handed him a basket of beans or corn, pretending it was too heavy, then showing off that he could carry it anyway. I'd grin at his effort, thinking one day he'd stand where I stood, understanding what it took to keep this place alive. I shook my head slightly, forcing the memory away. That boy no longer existed. The man in front of me wasn't shaped by those values. He'd rejected them. One evening stuck with me more than most. A summer storm had rolled in faster than expected. The wind ripped at the fields, threatening to flatten everything we'd worked for that season. Mark had been 16 then, old enough to help, young enough to grumble about it. Still, when I yelled for him, he came running. We pushed against the barn doors together, tying down what we could, shouting instructions over the roar of thunder. By the time the storm passed, we were soaked, exhausted, and laughing in relief. I'd looked at him then and thought, he gets it. He understands this life. But maybe I had been wrong. Maybe he only saw the struggle and not the pride. As these memories tangled in my head, my gaze drifted to the walls of the house. Pictures hung there, family portraits, snapshots from county fairs, the faded photo of Linda holding Mark as a baby in front of a brand new tractor. I could almost hear her voice again, reminding me, "The farm isn't just a place, Robert. It's who you are." The weight of those words pressed down on me now. She was gone, and the one person meant to carry on our legacy had treated it like a disposable ticket. "Dad, are you listening?" Mark's voice broke through, sharp with irritation. I nodded faintly, but inside I was far away. I remembered the Christmas, when we barely had enough money for gifts, but I built Mark a toy tractor from scraps of wood and metal. He had lit up as if I'd handed him the world. That same boy now tossed away the real tractor, the real land, the real bloodline, for a trip he'd forget in a week. Claire shifted uncomfortably. Her hands twisted the hem of her sweater. She knew I was lost in thought, and maybe she feared what I might say when I finally found my voice again. But I didn't speak yet. I stayed quiet, drowning in the flood of memories. There was the day Linda fell ill, too weak to leave the bed. I had carried her to the porch so she could watch the sunset over the fields one last time. She smiled, weak but genuine, whispering, "Promise me you'll keep this place alive." I nodded, choking back tears, certain that with Mark by my side, the promise would hold. Now, staring at him across the table, I felt that promise slipping through my fingers. Mark chuckled, sipping from his glass. "You should be happy for us, Dad. You've worked enough in your life. It's our turn now." Our turn. The words cut like a blade. Because he wasn't wrong, I had worked enough. But his definition of our turn was to erase everything I had stood for. I leaned back in my chair, my body aching with more than just surgical scars. The sacrifices of a lifetime paraded through my mind, each one heavier than the last. Nights spent repairing fences instead of sleeping. Summers when I missed local parades because the hay needed baling. Winters when I sold personal belongings just to buy seed for spring. Each sacrifice was a stone, and together they built the foundation of that farm. Now, Mark had toppled it with a single careless act. I studied him, really studied him. The way his eyes gleamed not with pride, but with victory, as though he'd outsmarted me. He thought he'd won. But inside, beneath the ache of betrayal, something stirred. Determination. Not rage, not grief, just a quiet, steady resolve. Because I knew something he didn't. And as he raised his glass in a mock toast to new beginnings, I let my face stay calm. I let the memories keep me anchored. Because remembering the years of sacrifice wasn't just about pain. It was about power. Every blister, every scar, every sleepless night. It had all taught me endurance. And endurance, I realized, was the one thing my son had never learned. Mark's glass clinked against Claire's, the hollow sound echoing through the room, like a cruel punchline. I didn't lift mine. Instead, I let my hand rest on the table, fingers tapping slowly against the wood. My son thought this was the end of the story, that his signature and a careless decision had erased my lifetime of work. But I knew otherwise, because long before this night, before Linda's last breath, before my body began failing me, I had prepared for the possibility that love alone wouldn't be enough to protect the farm. And that's when my mind drifted to the secret. The old desk in the back room had stood there for decades, its drawers stiff with age. To anyone else, it was just a piece of furniture too heavy to move, too outdated to matter. But I knew the truth. Beneath the bottom drawer, hidden behind a false panel I'd built with my own hands, there was a small wooden box. Inside that box lay a will. Not the one Mark thought existed, the one he had no doubt used to secure the sale, but a second, silent safeguard. I remembered the night I wrote it. Linda had just fallen asleep, her breathing faint but steady. I'd sat at the kitchen table, the lamp casting a weak glow over the papers. My hand shook as I held the pen, but not from weakness. No, it was fear. Fear that my own flesh and blood might one day betray the very soil that raised him. Fear that sacrifice alone wasn't enough to bind loyalty. So I wrote the will carefully, line by line, ensuring every detail was ironclad. I left instructions for the farm, protections that would prevent it from being sold without my approval, even after I was gone. I designated trustees, outlined contingencies, and signed my name with a trembling but determined hand. Linda had woken briefly that night, asking me what I was doing. I told her the truth. I'm making sure this land outlives us. Now, watching Mark sip his drink with that smug tilt of his chin, I felt the weight of that box pressing against my memory like a lifeline. "Dad, don't sulk. It's done," he said, setting his glass down with a sharp clink. I turned my gaze toward him, slow and steady. "You think you've outsmarted me, don't you?" His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning. "I think it's time to move on. You've done enough here. Claire and I deserve to live our own lives." Claire's eyes darted toward me, guilt flickering like a candle about to go out. She wanted to speak. I could see it, but fear kept her quiet. I didn't press. Instead, I leaned back, letting the silence stretch. In that silence, I traveled back to the day I hid the will. It had been spring, the ground soft from melting snow. I'd spent the morning with Mark, who was still in college then, helping him fix up an old truck he'd bought with his summer wages. He'd been so proud, so eager to learn, his hands greasy but determined. After he drove off, grinning ear to ear, I slipped into the study. I pried open the bottom of the desk drawer, slid the false panel into place, and tucked the box away. My hands lingered on the wood a moment longer than necessary, as though sealing a prayer into it. That box became my quiet guardian. For years, I never spoke of it, not even when the temptation grew to share the secret with Linda. I wanted her free of the burden. She had carried enough. Now, as I looked at my son, I felt a grim satisfaction. He thought he had buried me in defeat, but the truth was buried elsewhere, locked away in a desk he'd walked past 1,000 times. "Dad." Claire's voice broke the air softly, her tone almost pleading. "Maybe we should talk about this later." "No." Mark cut her off, his tone sharp. "He needs to hear it now. It's over." I studied him, the arrogance in his voice, the way he mistook ignorance for control. And in that moment, something unexpected flickered inside me. Not just anger, not just betrayal, but almost amusement. Because I had already anticipated this moment years ago. I rose slowly from my chair, my knees protesting, my body reminding me of every season of labor I'd endured. Mark watched, a shadow of impatience crossing his face. "What are you doing?" he asked. I didn't answer. I walked toward the hallway, each step deliberate, the sound of my cane tapping against the floorboards like a metronome of judgment. Behind me, I heard Claire whisper, "Mark, let him go." But he didn't reply. The back room smelled of old paper and dust, a scent both familiar and oddly comforting. My fingers brushed across the desk surface, rough with scratches and nicks. I crouched slowly, ignoring the pull in my spine, and slid open the bottom drawer. It creaked loudly, as if protesting after years of stillness. I hesitated only briefly before pressing against the corner panel. It gave way with a soft click. My hand reached into the dark cavity, closing around the smooth edges of the wooden box. When I returned to the dining room, both Mark and Claire stared at me. The box was small, unassuming, but in my grip it felt heavier than any burden I had carried. Mark frowned. "What's that?" I placed it carefully on the table between us, my eyes never leaving his. "This," I said quietly, "is the part of the story you don't know." His brows furrowed, his smirk faltering for the first time that evening. Claire leaned forward, her face pale. "You see, Mark," I continued, my voice steady now, "a man doesn't spend his life breaking his back for a piece of land without protecting it. You thought you held all the cards. But some hands are hidden until the right moment." I tapped the box gently. "And this is mine." The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation pressing down on all of us. Mark's jaw tightened, his arrogance replaced by something far less certain. For the first time in years, I saw him hesitate. And in that hesitation, I found my strength. The box sat between us like a loaded weapon, small yet crushing under the weight of everything unsaid. My fingers lingered on its lid, rough wood pressing against my skin. Across the table, Mark shifted in his chair, the same restless tapping of his heel I'd seen when he was a boy caught lying about breaking a window. Only this time, the stakes were far greater than glass. Claire looked from me to him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She was pale, her lips pressed so hard together they seemed colorless. The air felt heavier than any storm I'd weathered on the farm, as though the walls themselves were waiting for what came next. "Open it," I said quietly. Mark scoffed. "What, some old trinkets?" "Dad, this is." "Open it," I repeated, firmer this time. He reached out, hesitant, and unlatched the small brass clasp. The lid creaked as it lifted, revealing the stack of neatly folded papers inside. His fingers brushed over them, and I saw his throat tighten. "What is this?" he muttered, though the answer was already forming in his mind. I leaned forward, my voice steady, almost calm. "That's the will. The real one. The one you never knew existed." His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "That's impossible. I already." You already forged signatures. You already bullied your way into selling something you didn't own. I cut him off. But the truth doesn't bend just because you wanted it to. This farm was never yours to sell. The silence that followed was sharp, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Claire finally spoke, her voice trembling. Mark, is this true? He glared at me, jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. He's bluffing. He's just trying to scare us. I shook my head slowly. Read it. With shaking hands, Claire lifted the papers from the box. Her eyes scanned the words, widening with each line. Mark, this says everything was put into a trust years ago, that you can't sell without his approval. Her voice faltered. You never had the right. Mark's face flushed red. He slammed his fist against the table, rattling the silverware. You think a piece of paper changes what's already done? I sold it. I got the money. You can't undo that. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. That money will vanish faster than you think. And when it does, all you'll be left with is the truth you can't escape, that you betrayed your own father for a vacation. Claire flinched at the word vacation, her eyes darting down to her lap. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. The tension snapped as I slammed my hand against the table, louder than his. The room went still. You stood at this very table and laughed at me, I said, my voice rising with the weight of years. You sold my sweat, my wife's memory, the soil your grandfather bled into, and you think it's a joke? Mark opened his mouth, but no words came out. I built this place with my bare hands. I continued, my tone sharper now. Through droughts, storms, nights when the barn roof caved in, and mornings when the cattle nearly froze. And you, my only son, saw it all as nothing more than a ticket to a beach. Claire's breath caught. Mark, she whispered, her eyes pleading. Tell him you didn't mean it like that. But Mark's pride wouldn't let him bend. His eyes burned with defiance. You think keeping me out of your secrets makes you noble? You think hiding papers in a drawer makes you clever? You never trusted me. You never believed in me. Why should I care about your land when you never cared about me? His words hit harder than any physical blow. For a moment I faltered. My mind flashed back to his boyhood, his laughter when he first rode a bike down the dusty driveway, his muddy boots after helping me herd cattle, the nights I carried him half asleep from the truck to his bed. Had I truly failed him that much? But then I remembered Linda's last words to me, whispered with her fading breath. Protect the farm. It's our legacy. And I knew this wasn't about trust. This was about greed. I steadied myself, my voice low but cutting. You stopped being my son the moment you chose money over blood. The words hung in the air like smoke. Claire covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Mark, what have we done? Mark shoved his chair back violently, the legs screeching against the floor. He pointed a trembling finger at me. You can't erase me, old man. You can't. I'm your blood whether you like it or not. I stood slowly, the weight of years in my movements, but my gaze never wavered. Blood means nothing without honor. And tonight, you proved you have none. The silence after that was crushing. Mark's chest heaved, his face pale beneath the anger. Claire sobbed quietly, unable to meet my eyes. The box still sat open, its contents undeniable, its presence a shield between me and the betrayal across the table. I didn't raise my voice again. I didn't need to. The truth had already been spoken, and there was no taking it back. Mark sank back into his chair, shoulders slumped, his arrogance cracked wide open. For the first time, I saw not a man, but a boy lost in his own mistakes. And though part of me wanted to reach across and pull him back into the safety of forgiveness, another part, a stronger part, knew that bridge had been burned. That night at the dinner table, our family was no longer a family. It was a battlefield, and the scars it left would never heal the same. The house was silent after Mark's outburst, but it wasn't the kind of silence that brings calm. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with words that could never be taken back. The papers from the will still lay open on the table, their ink sharper than any blade. I could feel the weight of Linda's memory in the room, almost as if she were sitting beside me, watching, waiting for me to finish what she had once asked of me. Protect the farm. Protect yourself. Mark's breathing was uneven, his fists clenched at his sides, but the fight had gone out of him. Claire dabbed her face with the edge of a napkin, her mascara smudged like streaks of ash. For a moment, I looked at them both, not as enemies, but as people I once called family. Then the truth settled in like cold steel. They had already chosen their path, and it was no longer mine. I can't keep living in a house built on betrayal, I said finally, my voice quieter than before, but steadier. So tonight I draw the line. Mark scoffed, but it lacked the bite he once carried. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said, standing slowly, you and Claire will pack your things. You're leaving this house. You're leaving this farm. And when you walk out that door, you don't walk back in. Claire gasped, her eyes widening. You can't just throw us out. Yes, I can, I replied, because this land is mine, and because some wounds don't heal, no matter how much you want them to. Mark slammed his hand against the table, his voice cracking. You turn your back on your own son. The words cut deep, but I didn't flinch. No, Mark, you turned your back on me the moment you sold this place for sand and cocktails. The fight drained out of him then. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time that night, I saw not anger in his eyes, but something far more painful, shame. But it was too late. Claire tried to reason, her voice trembling. Please, can't we fix this? I shook my head slowly. Some things can't be fixed, and some choices can't be undone. You'll understand one day, maybe when you look back and realize that love isn't something you take for granted. But tonight, I have to choose peace over poison. I walked to the door, opened it wide, and let the night air spill into the room. The moon hung low, casting a pale light over the yard where Linda and I once planted roses together. I turned back to them. You've got until morning. Neither of them spoke. Claire buried her face in her hands. Mark stared at the floor, his jaw tight, but no words came. For once, the man who thought he held all the power had nothing left to say. That night, after they retreated to the guest room in silence, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the box still open before me. My hands traced the edge of the papers, the will that had saved me when everything else had crumbled. I thought about burning it, about ending the cycle of secrets, but I couldn't. It was more than just a document. It was proof that preparation could outlast betrayal. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, bitter and strong, and sat in the quiet. For years, this house had been filled with laughter, with the smell of Linda's cooking, with the sound of Mark running through the halls. Now it was filled with echoes. But even in those echoes, I found something I hadn't felt in years, control. The next morning was different. I woke to the sound of drawers opening and suitcases being dragged across the floor. There was no yelling, no pleading, just the dull thud of finality. When they came downstairs, Claire's eyes were red from crying. Mark wouldn't look at me. He carried his bag over his shoulder, his movements stiff. For a brief second, I almost stopped them. Almost. But then I remembered his laughter, the way he toasted to my farm funding his honeymoon, as though my life's work was nothing but a punchline. That memory hardened me again. I opened the front door. Go, I said. Claire whispered, I'm sorry. Though I wasn't sure if it was meant for me, for herself, or for a marriage built on lies. Mark just walked past me without a word. As their car pulled away down the gravel road, I stood on the porch with the morning sun breaking through the trees. For the first time in a long time, I breathed deeply. The air felt clean again. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. I went back to the farm routines, slower now with age, but steady. Feeding the animals, checking the fences, walking the rows of crops that had survived the sale paperwork, but not the storm of betrayal. At night, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my legs, listening to the crickets and watching the stars. It was lonely, yes, but loneliness felt lighter than betrayal. Neighbors came by, offering help once word got around. Mrs. Thompson from down the road brought me a pie, shaking her head. Family's a tricky thing, she said softly, but you did what you had to. I nodded. I didn't explain. Some truths don't need retelling. Peace didn't come all at once. It came slowly, in moments so small they were easy to miss. The smell of fresh soil after rain, the sound of the wind moving through the barn, the way the sun warmed the porch steps. Each moment reminded me that life still held pieces worth holding on to, even after betrayal. I wasn't the same man I had been before the surgery, before the sale, before the laughter at my expense. I was older, quieter, perhaps harder, but I was also free. Cutting ties with my son was the hardest decision I had ever made, but it was also the truest. Because sometimes love isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go, so the poison doesn't spread any further. And as the days turned into weeks, I realized Linda had been right all along. The farm wasn't just land. It was memory. It was legacy. And now, it was mine to protect in peace. I closed the will one final time, locked it away, and whispered to the empty room, "Rest easy, Linda. I kept my promise."